Good morning, everyone. So our first panel of the day is about the important issue of that we started to cover last night, and that's about our climate. But these people, these leaders that you're going to hear from today, have been taking on big oil and big gas for quite some time, and that's what we need to be doing. It's one thing to analyze the issue and to learn about the data, and then think about all the different science that we can do in a positive way, but there is a time that we need to finally take on big oil. So it's my pleasure to introduce people who are doing just that. Geevarghese from Our Revolution, Erich Pica from Friends of the Earth, Jamie Minden, from This Is Zero Hour, and Reverend Lennox Yearwood from Hip Hop Caucus. Please welcome them to the stage.
Thank you.
Come on down.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
All right. Welcome to our panel discussion on taking out big oil by taking on fossil fuel subsidies. My name is Joseph Geevarghese. I'm the executive director of Our Revolution, and I'm going to both participate in the panel and help moderate it. Before we begin, I want to quickly set the table for this conversation. We heard from Ben Jealous and Bill McKibben last night, right? We understand that the climate catastrophe is upon us right now. We see it. Some of us experience it. We know that we have a limited time to act before it gets much, much worse. And the fundamental question for us is, what is to be done that can be impactful given the scale and complexity of the challenge that confronts us? You know, and I would say this, right now we're fixated on the outcome of the 2024 election, and we should be, given that our democracy is on the line. But so too is the fate of our planet. And so the conversation we're going to have today, what is to be done, is timely. And I would argue it's timely because Donald Trump is pitching a deal to big oil executives, right? Give me $1 billion in campaign contributions, and I'm going to make sure the United States government keeps the fossil fuel industry in operation. I'm going to bless and finance the fossil fuel industry using the power of the United States government. What this quid pro quo, I think, ultimately reveals is just a weakness. And the weakness is this: just how dependent big oil is on the largesse of the United States government. That's what the exchange reveals for us. And the truth is, as taxpayers, we, the people, give big oil hundreds of billions of dollars every year through lucrative tax breaks, through contracts, through loans, through licenses, through leases. We fund their business model of death and destruction. Bernie recently introduced the End Polluter Welfare Act to phase out these lucrative tax subsidies, to cut back on the corporate handouts to big oil that are doing us in. And that's an important step. The thing is, we need a movement and a strategic opportunity to be able to get that policy over the finish line. We know that going into 2025, big oil has a plan, right, to keep the taxpayer-funded money pipeline going. They are making a plan right now. The question for us as progressives, as a movement, is what are we going to do to turn it off? We're fortunate to have an awesome panel of three of the leading climate campaigners in our country who are going to help us discuss this question and lay out strategic opportunities where we can make an impact, a transformative impact. First, we've got Erich Pica. He's the president of Friends of the Earth, which is, I think everyone knows, a leading environmental organization that has been on the front lines of the fight to end fossil fuel subsidies. We've got Reverend Lennox Yearwood. He is the president and CEO of the Hip Hop Caucus. Reverend Yearwood has also been on the front lines advocating for climate justice and civil rights and making sure that marginalized communities have their voices heard as we try to fight for climate justice. And lastly, we have Jamie Minden from 0 Hour. 0 Hour is a youth-led movement that's dedicated to addressing the climate crisis. And she represents really the next generation of determined voices who are speaking up to demand change now. People like Jamie are going to inherit our common home. So I'm going to kick off with a question for Jamie, and then we'll move along to the panelists. Want to make sure that we also leave time at the end to engage you for questions and comments. So without further ado, Jamie, let's get started. Tell us a little bit about how young people who are on the front lines are viewing the state of the climate movement right now. Are we winning or losing the future? And what do you guys think needs to be done?
Yeah, absolutely. I think an important note to make is that we're not just viewing the state of climate, we're experiencing it. I'm 21 years old, and I've never lived a year of my life without experiencing extreme climate disaster firsthand. I was born in the Bay Area, California, where pretty extreme drought started right before I was born. By the time I got to high school, we didn't have snow days, we had smoke days, where it was unsafe to go outside because the wildfire smoke was too thick. By the time I got to college, we simultaneously were experiencing extreme flooding and drought. And unfortunately, my story is not a unique one. We have an entire generation of young people growing up this way. Like, this is not only our future, this is our present. We heard last night about what's going on in New Delhi right now with 126 degrees Fahrenheit, causing mounting deaths, water shortages and wildfires. The beginning of this month in Brazil, hundreds of towns and Rio Grande do Sul were underwater. Mexico City, a city of 22 million people, could be without water in a matter of weeks. And so this is not just the future, this is the present. In April, the head of the UN Climate Agency said that we have just 2 years left to make drastic changes to the way that we spew greenhouse gases into our atmosphere. And as we know, the science says that global emissions must be halved in the next 5 years in order for us to have a chance at a livable future. And so we've had, as a climate movement, some really good clean energy wins recently. There's, as speakers were saying last night, it's important to celebrate the wins. But it's also important to note that the fossil fuel industry has not been stopped in any meaningful way. In fact, they have only ambitions of growing. Our country is at the core of the climate crisis. We produce more oil right now than any country ever has in the history of this planet. And this has given ExxonMobil and Chevron their biggest yearly profits in a decade. The climate movement, especially the youth movement, but in general, we're scattered. We've always had to be on the defensive. We've always had to be reactionary. And we've never been able to reunite around a single fight. And there's a good reason for this. There's so much work to do. I'm not trying to blame people, but we've never been able to be on the offensive. And unfortunately, we don't have much time. We have 2 years left to meaningfully turn this around and 5 years left to completely halve our emissions. And so now is the time to go for the jugular. Now is the time to kill the fossil fuel industry. because we don't have another chance at survival after this. And so I think that fossil fuel subsidies are a really key conversation to be having right now. Ultimately, to answer your question, it's up to us whether we win or lose the future. I think that it's a coin toss right now, unfortunately. But in order to win, we need to go on the offensive because defense has not been working.
Thanks, JB. So I want to pivot to Erich. As Jamie said, we need to go for big oil's jugular. Bernie's always said billionaires shouldn't exist. That's right. I don't think big oil should exist. And so, Erich, the question is, as you look out at the future, right, what are the opportunities that we have as a movement to take out big oil and to impact their bottom line?
Yeah, thank you, Joseph, and thank you for this great event. We're going to have what's called the Tax Super Bowl in January of 2025. And what that is all the Trump tax cuts that were passed in 2017, particularly the ones that impact individuals, are going to come up for reauthorization in Congress. We have an opportunity. We know that there will be a tax bill that if it is not passed, will end up increasing taxes on all individual Americans. And so we have an opportunity for 18 months to organize to take out the oil and gas industry. Because this tax bill will have to be reauthorized and it will have to be paid for. And the big fight will be over corporate taxes and the extension. And so when we talk about the oil and gas industry, what are we talking about? We're talking about over $110 billion in tax breaks over the next 10 years. When we talk about the oil and gas industry and the tax code, we're talking about, who knows when the tax code was first authorized and created? 1913. You know when the first oil and gas tax break was created? 1913. So we have a tax code that, since its creation, was subsidizing the oil and gas industry. Since its creation, the tax breaks that Ben Jealous and Bill McKibben were talking about last night, the Inflation Reduction Act tax credits, we have to get those reauthorized in 10 years. So the renewable energy is going to be like, help us, Congress, to get these tax breaks in 10 years. Oil and gas has had these tax breaks for over 100 years in the code. And this is the important thing. We have a moment. We have 18 months to organize. The environmental movement, the progressive movement, has never organized on oil and gas tax breaks at the scale that is possible right now, because we have a target date. We have January 25. We have 18 months. And we know that these tax credits are valuable. The oil and gas tax breaks increase the profit margins of these industries to 50, 60% on their investments. There are investments that the oil and gas industry make as a result of these tax credits that they would not do if they were competing on a regular market. This tax fight can be a national tax fight. This tax fight can be a state tax fight. There are states around the country that subsidize the oil and gas industry on top of what's going on federally, right? So we can use this moment to galvanize a climate movement against the fossil fuel industry to go after their bread and butter, which is the oil and gas tax break. And not only that, internationally, there are between $800 billion and $1 trillion annually going to the oil and gas industry. There are campaigns in Europe right now to repeal oil and gas tax breaks and subsidies. They are looking at the United States and what the U.S. is doing in our own subsidization of the industry. And if we can launch this movement over the next 18 months to repeal these tax breaks, What we can do is we can galvanize state-level fights, and we can help encourage the international fights. And I think we can win. I think we can win this fight if we take it on, and if we win this fight, we go after the money that's corrupting the politics. They're spending hundreds of millions of dollars in campaign contributions and lobbying. We can go after the money that's eroding. They're funding politicians that are eroding everything that we care about. So if anything else, taking out the oil and gas industry and their subsidies takes out the very opponents that are fighting against everything that we care about. So that's the opportunity we have. 2025 Trump tax cut reauthorization, 18 months between now and then to organize a movement to take them out.
Yeah.
Thank you, Eric. So Jamie laid out the urgency of now, right? We've got a limited window to act. Eric gave us the opportunity, right? We know that there's going to be a serious negotiation and campaign around the expiration of the Trump tax cuts in 2025. Our goal, and my question for Reverend Yearwood, is how do we make this issue, how do we put big oil at the center of this fight around taxes?
Well, let me thank you for that question. And it's really great to be here with you. I really am excited to be part of anything that the Sanders Institute and obviously Bernie Sanders is doing. Definitely, it's so important now to have true progressives and leaders in any form of government, but particularly in Washington, D.C. It's an honor to be in a place here with my esteemed panelists who are doing some great work. And one of the greatest organizations to do this work, their president, CEO, Ben Jealous, with the Sierra Club. Just a little bit of background so you can hear where I'm coming from on this issue. I wear a lot of hats, literally. And so I would say that the three hats that I get to wear is doer, donor, and door opener. And so you heard the doer hat. President and CEO, Hip Hop Caucus, good to see Josh Fox here. They do a lot of work around storytelling and production, creating content to help people to understand the movement. So really proud of Hip Hop Caucus and what they're doing in that arena. As a door opener, as somebody who's a product of the civil rights movement, was mentored by Dr. Dorothy Irene Height. I am in a position where I want to open doors for new generations, and particularly what I believe is a solution, a climate movement that is led and run, that is a matriarchal, black woman, queer, young people, frontline, fence line, environmental justice movement. I actually think that is the solution to winning on climate. So my job is to open up the doors to many people who you don't know. And then my other hat, I think is actually very important for this conversation, is that I am the senior climate advisor for Bloomberg Philanthropies, in which part of my job is to literally figure out how to give out over $1 billion to help win on this issue over a period of time. So you can see I have a very extensive standpoint. The key thing here is that what I can tell you is that the climate crisis is real. Being from Louisiana, born in Shreveport, being from a place that's called Cancer Alley, which is an 85-mile stretch of land between Baton Rouge and New Orleans, because of petrochemical facilities that kills Americans. The climate crisis is real. And Jamie said quite well, Americans, not just black Americans, or brown Americans, or indigenous Americans, or poor, or rich, white, straight or gay. Americans are dying because of the climate crisis. and because we are addicted to fossil fuels. More so than that, which is almost like a cruel joke, we are paying those to kill us. Their business plan literally means a death sentence for our communities. And we give them our tax dollars, not to our schools, not to the playgrounds, not to helping create sidewalks safer for our community. We've been giving tax dollars for these folks to not only be greedy, but to then eliminate Americans. So the fundamental part of this conversation is that do we, as Americans, want to fund something that not only is killing us now, but will destroy our future later? That's what we're talking about. That is not a Democrat issue, or Republican issue, or independent issue. That is just a human issue. That do we feel okay with giving someone money knowing that it is killing us? So the core thing here that I would want to dig into with my years of being in this movement really center around the fact that our movement needs a lot of work to be done. We, as a climate movement, are unfortunately at this time a siloed, segregated, progressive climate movement, meaning that we have a tendency to silo our issues depending on where we are. Very important issues. It could be Atlantic Coast Pipeline, the Mountain Valley Pipeline, Line 6, Line 3, LNG. It could be offshore wind. It could be renewable energies. It could be climate finance. It could be a myriad of things that we're talking about. But unfortunately, we do that in silos. And we also do it making us put people into buckets that we feel fit us. So for instance, we will put people that, if you're black, that means you're, or brown, it means you're environmental justice, you're front line, you're fence line. If you're from Vermont, then we're climate activists working on these issues. If you're from the Bay or you're from Detroit, we put ourselves into these buckets. Where that gets shattered and where it got shattered was last year. Is when the hauling of vinyl chloride, which is a petrochemical, from Houston was traveled through Norfolk Southern on a railroad, brought throughout the country, and then exploded in East Palestine, Ohio, causing that community, predominantly white, predominantly moderate, mostly Republican, to be then a frontline, fence line community. What that also exposed was two things. Because it was a predominantly white community that now was suffering with something called environmental justice issue, our movement literally did not show up. And in that process, who did show up, so much talk about the person who's running for office, let's talk about him. A month after the accident, Donald Trump literally became the first person to launch a presidential campaign from an environmental justice site when he went to East Palestine, Ohio. Now, of course, it was disgusting. He was throwing out MAGA hats instead of anything else, like paper towels did in Puerto Rico. But regardless of that, that is where he launched his campaign from. And it was strategic because the mere key of his campaign was that this country, this administration, does not care about white people. And so he launched it there at an environmental justice site. With the script, I'm very happy that this administration has done the IRA, they've done BIF, they've done all kinds of legislation. They paused in LNG, phenomenal things, but did not show up. President Biden did not show up to East Palestine until 1 month after the 1-year anniversary of that derailment. And so the thing here is that our movement, which is decreasing, the Pew Research did a study saying that in 1989, 78% of Americans, Republican, Democrat, Independents, consider themselves to be environmentalists. In 2022, that number has gone down to 38%. So that means that people no longer see themselves as environmentalists anymore. They do not see, now the issue of clean air and clean water is still very high, particularly the issue of plastic, which is something we should talk about, that people across all lanes hate plastic. But this is the key thing here. The issue on taxation allows us to once again broaden our movement. It allows us to go to Republicans, to go to Democrats, to go to independence and go across this country, go to my folks, I'm a former Air Force officer, go to folks in the military, go to folks in different parts of the world in this process, and go to them and says simply, your tax dollars are going to go to those who are rich and are killing our communities. Do you want that? Is that what you, Republican, Democrat, Independent, are signing up for? Because how you feel about the climate crisis, are you okay with that? And if you're not, then we should do everything we can as Americans, not progressives, not climate activists, not folks in Vermont, not folks in California, not folks from Louisiana, but as Americans, can we stop that madness? Because the reason why oil and gas is cheap is because we are already paying for it. That is the reality. So I leave you with this in this process as we move forward in this conversation, that our movement has a lot of work to do. I mentioned to you that I'm also on the funding side in my work. The New School did a study in which in that study, $1 billion, which was given out, actually $1.3 billion, which was given out for climate advocacy to fight on this issue. Out of that $1.3 billion, only 1.3% went to BIPOC and environmental justice-led organizations. Meaning that while we call for Justice 40 on the federal level, we don't even have that within our own movement, which means that we don't view that as important. So I do think that we need to do a number of things as a climate movement. Yes, we can talk about what's going on in New Delhi. I think my dear brother Bill mentioned that last night. I think we should talk about all of that. But we don't need to go into the oppression Olympics or into trauma porn to convince people that their tax dollars should not be used to eliminate us as a human species on this planet. We simply need to go to them and say there are better ways to use our money than for paying for folks to have a yacht in the Atlantic or the Pacific Ocean, which unfortunately is all coming together. Thank you.
Woo. Thank you, Rev. The challenge here, I think there's an incredible amount of opportunities, right? There is a legislative opportunity that's coming up. There's a messaging frame around the use of our taxpayer dollars to fund our own deaths and destruction. Those are all, I think, pretty significant. The truth is, though, right, we face challenges depending on who wins power next year, whether it's the White House or different houses of Congress. So how do you guys feel this plays out under those scenarios? Is this a trifecta only campaign, meaning Democrats control all branches of government, or is this something that extends beyond that?
Go ahead.
I think we have to wage the fight regardless. I mean, the oil and gas industry has been operating with impunity for over 100 years. They're corrupting our politics, they are polluting the climate, and they're getting away with it. We've discovered during the Inflation Reduction Act fight, when there was a real effort to repeal the oil and gas subsidies, that they expended a lot of political capital to keep those subsidies in place. And so regardless, Joseph, of the political outcome, the fact that we can wage a campaign that forces the oil and gas industry to expend political capital to maintain their largesse from the federal government, regardless if we win or lose, is a winning strategy for us. Because that means they're not trying to repeal the stuff in the Inflation Reduction Act. That means that they're not trying to work on reducing their corporate tax their corporate taxes in other means, in other areas, right? It means that they are not kind of focusing on like how to further game the system and what they are. So if we can put them on the defense regardless if it is a trifecta or some sort of split government, the fact that they have to go to Congress and justify their $100+ billion in tax breaks means that they are spending political capital that is of value to them. And to the extent that we can force them to spend it and utilize it to justify what they're doing, because it's unjustifiable, as the Rev said, we're winning that fight.
Go ahead. Well, I think, one, they want more money. Let's be very clear. This is not, they're not.
More money.
They actually, this is what they're looking to get out of these tax subsidies and tax breaks. They actually want more, and so they're looking forward to that. And obviously, we've heard the now infamous story of them wanting to pony up, or be asked to pony up $1 billion, which is like a discount for what they're looking to get. I do think this is the thing that's important about this. I think narrative storytelling and narrative is critical in this conversation. We have to, I think sometimes we preach to the choir. You know, Rev here from Burlington knows what I'm talking about when I say that. But we preach to the choir a lot, which means that we forget that people don't know this, what we're talking about. They don't understand. So you may not understand some of the pieces around that, the need that these tax breaks are coming up, the needs for that there's still ways to stop these things. I think that we have a situation here where, and let me be very, very clear, the fossil fuel industry is evil. I mean evil. We have never, as humans, dealt with anything as global and as destructive and as suicidal as this industry. It used to be a time where people were extractive and they would hurt other people, but now we're at a time where this industry is literally willing to sacrifice their own children and their own children. They know the science. They're willing to have their own children live horrible deaths. And when you're dealing with someone who is understanding that their own kids are going to have a horrible existence because of their greed and they still pumping, you're dealing with a different kind of entity. You're not dealing with something that is actually you can reason with or you can kind of just bargain with. This is something that is literally so evil. They are putting plants on former plantation sites throughout the South. Like they're literally going down and seeing where black people were enslaved, beaten, and raped, and that is where they are now putting their plants. This is an entity that clearly looks at zoning, knowing that 68% of black and brown people are now living within 30 miles of coal-fired power plants, but they're sitting around boardrooms and designing that. Like, this is not the entity. This is something who I actually was at the last COP conference in Dubai, and Darren Woods was there, who was the CEO of Exxon. And I didn't really want to talk to Darren Woods, the CEO of Exxon. And I was trying to make a beeline. I saw him looking at me. I was trying to make a beeline to the bathroom, but he cut me off. He was pretty fast over at Exxon. And so, and then he was like, wanted to tell me how I was wrong on the campaign we have on stopping petrochemicals, wrong on that. And I said, all right, I guess we're going to have this talk right now. We having this conversation? I said, all right. I didn't know we have it in Dubai and at the climate conference. But this is the thing that got me. I told him, I said, well, listen, Exxon has lied. You have done so much destruction. Thank God Vermont is now going to hopefully has a law to hope you'll get some of that money back, what they've done to you here in Vermont, and other states take your lead. But this is what he looked me back in the eye. And I told him, I said, what you're doing is killing our people. And he looked me in the eye and says, no, it's not. No, it's not. And me knowing that I live in a community called Cancer Alley, that people are dying, and you look me dead in my eye, means that you are okay with us dying. So when I say this, we have to use every measure to take away not only their social license, one, two, We have to take away their funding. We must stop the money pipeline at all costs. Our banks, our funding institutions, nothing can fuel our destruction. And 3, we must work with groups like from the Hip Hop Caucus to Sierra Club to LCV to Friends of the Earth and many others, and we have to rethink our climate movement, our revolution. We have to rethink our climate movement. We really do. Because I think that we have limited ourselves and we're shrinking because we are not broad enough to include everybody in this new clean air, clean water revolution. And I think that we have siloed ourselves and we must stop that. So those are the 3 things that we need to leave out of this thing with. And if we do those three things, this is the thing. We don't get any cookie bin, or we don't get any awards or ribbons for that. And most of us, in reality, except for maybe you, I told you this earlier, may not even be around to see if we win or lose. But like for me, as I sit on the stage in Vermont, in this state that was the first state to get rid of slavery, for me as a black man, I see the benefit of Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman and many others unnamed. I pray that we can stop this madness of funding people who are killing us through taxation, that I won't see and you won't see 100 years from now what it looks like. But if they have clean air and clean water and they live decent lives, and our children don't hate us to the core of our being because we were more worried about a felon or other policies than about making sure that we transition from fossil fuels to clean energy, then I'm telling you, that's all that's going to matter. Even for the oil execs, like the Rockefellers, who now say they had wished they had been a part of the Beyond Coal campaign. Their descendants will curse them. It will happen. But unfortunately, if we don't have clean air, clean water, it won't matter. That is what this fight is all about. That is the stake we're leaving for future generations. That they simply can live. Thank you.
So I think we're running out of time. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yep.
I just want to say, I think, this is also an opportunity to sweep the legs out from underneath the fossil fuel industry.
Yep.
As you said, Rev, 100 years from now really matters, but also what's going on today and within the next 5 years really matters. Yep. I think within the next 5 years, our world is going to be pretty unrecognizable in many ways. Whether you're here working in healthcare, or income inequality, or labor, the reality is that this issue is about to become a part of your work if it's not already. Climate's not just an issue for environmentalists. It never was, but really now it's about to not be. And so I know we all have our own fights. I know everyone here is working on things that are really, really important. But if we don't all go out on this fight, if we don't all go out on climate, we're going to get taken out. It's a matter of survival. And so, yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
No, that's right. And I want to do an amen there. Because at the end of the day, it is either us or them. It's either we the people or it's big oil. That is the choice. And we have to do everything in our power to take out this industry. They should not exist. So last question, and we'll keep it brief because I think we have to pivot to the next panel, is what comes next? What can people in this room do to plug in to the conversations that we're starting to have?
I think the first one is we've got Senator Sanders introduce the End Polluter Welfare Act. It is the most comprehensive bill out there to eliminate every oil and gas fossil fuel subsidy that is in the tax code, that is in the leasing, that's in the loans, that's in the royalties, it's in the giveaway. Every group, every leader here who hasn't should be signing on and endorsing the End Polluter Welfare Act. because that is the organizing vehicle. We've got to get support behind it. We've got to get members of Congress on it. We've got to get community activists out there in the streets talking to their members and say, this is what we got to do. Because that becomes the base for this fight that we need to have in 2025 when the Trump tax cuts come up for reauthorization. So that's step one, and like one of the more important steps we can take right now. Sounds like a good first step. All right, I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank Jane and David for having us. Look forward to continuing this conversation. Thank you.